In the previous 2 episodes of Build, we talked about the importance of accessibility, and we shared 3 critical strategies that will help make a big impact when it comes to building and designing products. If you missed either of those episodes, I've included links to them below. In today's final episode on accessibility, we're going to talk about what accessibility means across devices, for both web as well as mobile. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Poornima Vijayashanker. In each episode, I invite innovators, and together we debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. We're continuing our conversation on accessibility with Laura Allen, who is the Accessibility Program Manager at Google for Chrome and the Chrome operating system. Thanks again for joining us, Laura.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
One of the inspirations for this series on accessibility came from our audience member, Jane. So I want to start off today's episode by reading the question that Jane posed. Jane wrote, "Poornima, thanks for tackling a wide variety of topics when it comes to building software products. One area that I'm curious about is accessibility. As a user experience designer, I know accessibility is important, but I've struggled when it comes to balancing out accessibility across devices and also making mobile apps interactive and fun without compromising on accessibility. How should I go about thinking about web versus mobile and balancing out fun and engaging interactions with accessibility in mobile apps? Sincerely, Jane." Well, Jane, if you're tuning into this episode, thank you for writing in. And Laura, why don't we start by answering Jane's question to begin with? How do we balance out web versus mobile?
So yeah, it's a really great question. And when you think about it, a lot of these concepts that we were talking about in previous episodes are actually going to stand true no matter what platform you're actually designing for. So we think back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. They talk about perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, and those sorts of concepts and principles that go within each of those categories. And just taking one example, color contrast. So color contrast, having really solid contrast between text and its background, that's important no matter what device you're on, right? So it's going to be the same sort of truth for if you're on a mobile phone or if you're on a desktop computer. So a lot of these concepts are going to just kind of span across platforms and be really relevant for you to consider. One thing that's obviously a little bit different on mobile is that it's clearly more touch-oriented for most users. And things like, touch targets and the size of your touch targets, that's important to consider. So some people might not have as precise motion or control as they're kind of using their phone or tablet. But honestly, lines are getting a little bit blurry anyway. Think about all the different devices that are out there now, like laptop computers that also have touch screens or convert and are then used in tablet mode. So as designers, we're starting to think about, how do we just make an app itself accessible in all these different platforms, or a site itself?
Let's tackle Jane's second question on how do we balance out fun and engaging interactions versus accessibility?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So I think something that we should keep in mind when developing for mobile is sometimes we just rely a little bit too heavily on this idea of gestures and touch-based interfaces. And I understand why, of course, it's typically being used by, using touch. Some users aren't able to actually use touch to operate a phone. Like there's something called switch access, for example, which basically allows you to pair a 1-button or 2-button or multiple button switch and control a phone just using those external buttons, just as one example. Some people might be only using voice to control a device. Some people might be navigating with a screen reader. So as something like flashes on the screen, they're not able to actually perceive that and then catch it in time to actually take action. So thinking about, what are these things that we're assuming our users can do here? And then kind of offering alternative ways to actually operate. So for example, if you have an app that you're kind of building where you have cards that you need to kind of swipe away to take action, a swipe can work for some people, but for others, maybe that's not going to be possible. So how do we think about things like, okay, can we add a hidden close button here so that a screen reader could actually access that and somebody could just simply double tap to activate? Lots of different things like that. Just again, removing assumptions about how our users are interacting and then just building to kind of cater to different groups.
I think your answers are going to be very helpful for Jane and the rest of our audience. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share when it comes to accessibility?
Sure, yeah, a couple things. So first, just thinking again about mobile versus desktop and web and whatnot, I think it's also really helpful when designing for mobile to be thinking about the platform-specific guidelines. So, and this is like guidelines for more so like just the interaction models for that platform. So I know like there's the Android developers resources and site. iOS has the iOS human interface guidelines. And these things obviously go well beyond just the concepts of accessibility. But they're really important to keep in mind because if you think about it, like one example of what would be discussed is like focus management. When you first open up an app, where is focus meant to go? Like what is the default? And as you think about these concepts that are kind of illustrated through guidelines for each of these platforms, it's really helpful to keep that consistent so that when a user who happens to be using assistive technology interacts with this app, they get a kind of similar experience to what they're used to. It's a similar sort of model for them, and therefore it's an easier ramp-up curve to actually get introduced to your design. So that would be one suggestion. Another thing to consider, which we haven't really discussed to this point, like we talked a lot about auditing and integrating accessibility into your processes. And a lot of what we've talked about so far has been like manual testing and the importance of really diving in, trying out the keyboard only experience or trying out a screen reader. And absolutely, I think that is so critical. I think, honestly, I often get asked about manual versus automated testing. Like, what can we put in place to run automated tests? And there are some great things to do. So there are automated tools, like for example, there's an Android app called the Android Accessibility Scanner. It's free. It helps to run an audit of your app's accessibility and kind of show you the results for things.
Great. Yeah.
For things like missing labels on a button or color contrast, things like that, which I would imagine to be kind of like low-hanging fruit that you can kind of look at and hopefully fix rather quickly. There are similar things on the web and desktop. Like I know Lighthouse is a great tool which integrates with the Chrome developer tools. There are lots of other types of tools out there that you can leverage to do some automated testing and audits. But in my opinion, automated can only go so far. So that's where you can use it to kind of see a baseline, track progress over time in your results. But manual is really critical. So again, whether it's you going through or having assistive technology users go through and give you feedback, that's where you're going to capture that more human interface experience. You're going to understand what is the usability of this product, whether on mobile or on desktop. So it's just really critical to kind of find that right balance of manual versus automated testing.
Well, this has been wonderful, Laura, and we'll be sure to include all the resources you mentioned below so that our audience can make sure to get access to them.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. This has been great. That's it for this week's episode of Build. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more episodes like this, and be sure to share this with your friends, your teammates, and your boss. And thank you to our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker, for their help in producing this episode. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker. Welcome to Femgineer's Confident Communicator course introductory video series. I'm Poornima Vijayashanker, the founder of Femgineer.
And I'm Catlin, a former tech executive who's now an advocate for women who are working in the tech industry.
For the last 22 years, I have been speaking in public, and for the last 8 within the tech industry. I have given a TEDx talk, I've been a guest lecturer at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, a mentor in residence at Techstars, and was the founding engineer of Mint.com.
I am on my second career. In my first career, I spent 25 years building software products. I started out as a software engineer and over time moved to the executive level, where I was a vice president at Adobe Systems. Now, in my second career, I'm an advocate for women, which means I do a lot of public speaking about diversity, about women's leadership topics, and I've given a TEDx talk.
The Confident Communicator course is a live online course that Karen and I co-teach together. In this video series, we're going to give you a sense of what the Confident Communicator course is and what you'll get out of it.
You'll learn about the challenges Poornima and I have faced learning the craft of public speaking ourselves. You'll learn why we decided we just couldn't keep all of this knowledge to ourselves And you'll hear from students who have taken the class about how they have become more confident communicators.
You're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at the entire course. You'll meet some past students and see how they went from being shy and nervous to poised and confident communicators. You're also going to meet employers and sponsors who found the course valuable enough to invest in and send their people. And finally, you'll get some sample lessons so you know the material that we're going to be covering. Sign up below to receive the first lesson immediately, where you'll understand why it's not good enough to just be heads down. You need to speak up to get the recognition you deserve. Ciao for now.